Hey, hello, what's up everyone? In this video, I'm going to teach you about what happens when Ketu is sitting in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. So, before beginning, if you guys not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon and click the like button. And if you guys have any doubt after watching this video, please do mention it in my below comment section, okay? And just please do attend for my Facebook community page, Parikshith Astrology, where you can also post some astrological stuff and gain knowledge. So, let's begin. Now, what happens when Ketu is sitting in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart? Now, what does planet Ketu represent? It represents separation, divorce. It represents isolation or isolated place. It also represents the moksha. It also represents spiritual. Okay. Now, Ketu also represents living far away from one's own place or from one person to another person, living far away from them. Now, what happens when Ketu is sitting in the 7th house? Okay, now what does 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart represents? It represents your spouse appearance, your spouse characteristics. It also represents your spouse nature. Okay, it also represents your ability to compromise in your marriage or not. Can be seen through the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. Now, what happens when Ketu is sitting there in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart? That shows that your spouse can be very spiritual. It also shows that your spouse loves to be in an isolated place. It also shows that you might be having some past life connection with your spouse. Okay, so because Ketu represents the past life and 7th house represents your spouse in the Navamsa chart, that shows that you might be having some past life connection with your spouse and you can feel it. Okay. Now, it also shows that you might live far away from your spouse. It also shows that you might even get divorced or get separated sometimes. And it also shows that after the married life, your spouse might be living far away from you. Or it also shows that you might get isolated yourself from your spouse sometimes. Now, Rahu will be in the first house if Ketu is in the 7th house. That shows that there might be some problems in your married life. If Rahu dispositor is not placed to reveal, then that shows that there might be some problems in your married life. And also again, if Ketu dispositor is not placed to reveal, then that shows that divorce may also happen. Now, what happens if Ketu is conjuncted with different planets like benefic planets and malefic planets? Now, coming to the benefic planets. Now, what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with benefic planets like Moon, Venus, Mercury and Jupiter? Now coming to the planet Moon. Now what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with planet Moon? Now what does Moon represent? It represents your mother. It represents your happiness or it signifies your happiness. It also represents your emotions. It also represents your mind. So when Moon and Ketu are conjuncted in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart, that shows that after your married life, your mother's health might get affected. It also shows that you might get depression also. It also shows that you might be interested towards the spirituality or your spouse might be interested towards the spirituality. Your spouse might be a very spiritual type of person. Okay, so these are all things can be seen through when Moon and Ketu are conjuncted in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart. Now what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with planet Jupiter? Now what does planet Jupiter represent? It represents the divine knowledge. It also represents the guru, teacher or advisors or counselors. Okay, so it also represents the ego or selfish, you can say. When Jupiter and Ketu are conjuncted in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart, that shows that your spouse might be having some selfishness, or it also shows that your spouse might be having some ego problem. Your spouse might be your guru, your spiritual guru. Your spouse might be your advisor or counselor or someone who gives some advice to your life, okay, which may changes after your married life. Now, it also shows that your spouse might be having some problems like stomach problems and all, because Jupiter represents the stomach and all. Now, what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with planet Mercury? Now, what does planet Mercury represent? It represents your communication. It also represents the nervous problem or skin disease and all. It also represents your business, your intellectual ability and or logical ability. So when Ketu and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that your spouse will be very youthful in look wise and all. It also shows that your spouse will be having very good communication. It also shows that if Mercury dispositor or Ketu's dispositor is afflicted, then that shows that there might be some problems in the communication of your spouse. It also shows that your spouse might be having some skin related problems or nervous disease and all, or your spouse might be having some nervousness to talk in front of everyone, and your spouse might be also shy a little bit. Now it also shows that your spouse might be having some cunningness and all because Mercury is afflicted here. Okay. Now what happens when Ketu is with Venus? Now what does planet Venus represents? It represents beauty, luxurious life. It also represents love, romance. It also represents wife in a man's chart. So when Venus and Ketu are conjunct in the 7th house of your DNA chart or Navamsa chart, that shows that you will surely get divorce if the dispositor is not placed very well. If it is also placed very well, then there might be some relationship problems. If Jupiter is aspecting that Venus, particularly with Ketu sitting in the 7th house, then sometimes you will fight, sometimes it will get recovered, the fight will slowly get recovered, and your relationship will be very good, and your spouse might be interested towards the spiritual part of the life. Coming to the planet Sun, now what happens when Sun is conjuncted planet Ketu? Now what does planet Sun represents? It represents your father, it represents your government, it also represents king, it also represents politics and all. Now it also represents dominative nature of the person. It also represents ego. Now when Sun and Ketu are sitting in the 7th house, that shows that this person might have chances of getting divorced. That is, might have chances of 50% getting divorced because both the planets are malefic and cruel. Now Sun also represents king. So when Ketu is with Sun, that shows that you might have some problem with higher authorities and all after the married life, or your spouse might dominate over you. It also represents your spouse might be having some ego problem. It also represents there might be some relationship problems and all. Now it also represents you might be having some trouble with your government authorities, or you might be having trouble with the government also. Now what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with planet Mars? Now what does planet Mars represent? It represents your aggressive nature. It also represents the physical energy. It also represents any type of technical things. It also represents engineering fields and all. So what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with planet Mars? That shows that your spouse might be from a engineering background or might be an educated person. It also shows that your spouse might be very good at technical things and all. And it also shows that your spouse might be having some aggressive type of personality and all. Now what happens when Ketu is conjuncted with planet Saturn? Now what does planet Saturn represent? It represents your hard work. It represents the workaholic nature of a person. It represents the job. It also represents sometimes laziness if afflicted and debilitated. You will also get a spouse who might be having their own principles and all, where you need to follow them. So if Saturn is very weak or debilitated or afflicted by any other malefics, then you will get a very negative results of this. Like say for example, you might be getting a spouse who might be very lazy, who might not be interested to do any kind of things or any work in your home after the marriage life. So yeah, this was my analysis about Ketu in the 7th house of the DNA chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. So if you are new to my channel, please subscribe below, or else I will see in the next video. So if you want any consultancy, please do contact my given below WhatsApp number, or else you can even mail me also. So until and unless, thank you, bye bye, love you, take care.